I am the famous American. I need to talk about the American perception. When I say American, I mean United States of America, not simply continent. We're not talking about a continent here, we're talking about a nation, the United States of America. My perception, most Americans' perception, if you were to talk about Portugal and you were to also talk about Morocco, here's what I'm going to predict would happen. The American would not quite be sure positively if those countries are in Europe. So I want to address that. I think when it really comes down to it, a lot of Americans understand that Spain is part of Europe. What throws it off is, yes, the genetic mix. There is a lot of Jewish, Middle Eastern, a lot more mix in there with a typical Spanish person in Spain that's going to look a bit like me because I do have that background as an American. But beyond that, though, when you look at those features compared to someone in England, for example, there's a reason why people are a little bit hesitant to, yes, Spain's part of Europe. They get a little bit confused, but then they know, wait, yes, Europe. Now, I'm not defending that. I'm saying that's a fact, and a lot of viewers struggle with that. When I speak truth of a certain limited perspective Americans have, a lot of viewers get triggered by that. Their emotions flare up when they learn that. But imagine, again, if you lived in a country, the United States, where you have basically 1 year, for me it was 6th grade, where we actually studied world geography, and never again, never before, never after, that was it. So unless you are going into a specific career in college or something like that, as an American in public school, most likely you're not going to learn a whole lot about world geography. I remember for me, it ultimately come down to just, we had this quiz and we had to like fill in like 50 different countries. We had to label them on a world map. And you just cram for this test, you study it for a couple weeks, and you hope you do on the test. And it's never brought up again, and no one ever talks about world geography beyond that. That was my experience, and I feel that a lot of Americans have the same experience. Why? I think ultimately we are secluded on this side of the world. We have 2 international neighbors, and that's it, Canada and Mexico. And there's not really a reason to know. Our livelihood does not depend on knowing where Belgium is on a map. It's not depending on that. So not defending it, I'm just saying that it exists. And I think a lot of people get triggered when I say that was the case. And they say, why don't you go study a map now? But again, imagine, how would my life benefit now for me learning more about world geography other than what I'm doing? I love it when people say, do your research on these videos before you start talking about it. Well, for me, this is my version of doing that, because not only can you educate me, but you can educate all Americans watching these videos. 3 minutes in now, let's finally get to the topic that you saw in the title of the video, and that is comparing Portugal and Morocco. So I'm going to be honest, and it's gonna trigger a lot of people, but this is on you, not on me. I'm being honest and I'm being real with you. Until a couple years ago, when I took my DNA test and found out that virtually about 1/3 of my DNA goes back to Spain, and I looked it up on a map and I thought, wait, Spain shares a landmass with another country? Portugal, like there's just a border between them, but ultimately it's the same mix of people. That's why on the DNA test it just shows up as Iberian. That's why they don't say Spanish, they say Iberian, because it could be either or. It's basically the same mix of genes either way, Spanish or Portuguese. So I learned that just a couple years ago, really when I started this channel. However long this channel's been around, that's when I learned that Spain and Portugal were the same landmass and ultimately the same mix, basic mix of genetic background. So if you need to get triggered by that, by my honesty as an American, go ahead and put your comment right there. You can even say, Nick, you triggered me right at about 4:20 into the video. I got really triggered by that. But again, that's me being honest. Now, beyond that though, so imagining Portugal. If you were to ask me, say 3 years ago, or even 5 minutes ago before I saw this video, Nick, is Portugal part of Europe? I'd say it shares the landmass of Spain, so yes, by default, it has to be Europe. But if you said, what about Morocco? To me, Morocco really seems very much like Spain and Portugal, but I do know that they're separated by water. And I'm going to tell you that Morocco is actually in Africa, which for me, it's one of those exceptions to the rule as far as an African country. When I think of most African countries, I think of people who have what we as Americans would deem African African traits. Exceptions to the rule, obviously, South Africa would be an exception. Egypt would be an exception. And Morocco to some degree would be. Though a lot of people I've met in person and know personally that were from there looked vaguely African as far as the predictable mix there. But ultimately, I would accept that Morocco is part of Africa, but it's one of the exceptions to the rules as far as what people generally look like from that area. So I'm going to go ahead and give you an opportunity to leave your comments. And keep in mind, again, I've been giving these warnings the whole time. People are wired to be tribalistic, to say, look at that stupid, ignorant American. He doesn't know anything. And people love to do that with my videos. I accept that. My feelings aren't hurt. I'm being real, and a lot of people can't handle that honesty. So I understand a lot of people have something to prove, and go ahead and do that in the comments. But ultimately, what I'm looking for is a more intelligent, mature conversation as you fill me in on what I don't know about the world. I'm openly admitting I don't know more. Well, Nick, why don't you just simply look it up? Why don't you do your research? Well, for me, I'm a creative person. So I create these videos for other people who might want to know more about it, and they can learn about it. But as we learn about world geography and concepts and perceptions, keep in mind, tribalism exists too. Me versus the stupid American, right? So I would ask you to be more mature than that. I mean, it's not going to hurt my feelings if you don't. It's just I open up a gateway anytime I have these conversations. I'm looking for those people who have more intelligence, who are able to carry on a conversation other than just throwing rotten tomatoes at me. I'm curious for those people, because those are people I tend to actually interact with in the comments. But either way, if you want to try to insult me, it won't work, but you're welcome to do that. I am the face of Spain. Morocco, part of Africa. Portugal, part of Europe, along with Spain. Your comments belong right here.